Okay, let's dive into this. Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're unpacking a really fascinating framework proposed by thinker Ali Mohammed Al-Shurafa, right alongside the analytical commentary of Bahjat al-Obaidi. The core of their argument, well, it's about re-establishing Islamic methodology by looking at the sacred text through a very specific structural lens. We're going to explore exactly how they argue for returning directly to the source material as a way to clear up literally centuries of historical debate.
So, here's our roadmap for today. We'll start with reference and scale, move on to sanctifying human interpretation, and then do a critical review of Zakat. After that, we'll look at sacred text and human understanding, and wrap up with rebuilding the Muslim mind. We're essentially moving from scriptural theory down into practical jurisprudence and then zooming back out to look at the broader societal impact.
Section 1. The Quran, Reference and Scale. The author posits that the Quran absolutely must be the absolute, ultimate judge over every single fatwa and act of worship.
And this brilliantly illustrates his point. Al-Shurafa presents this textual evidence from Surah Al-Nahl, verse 89, which explicitly describes the book as a clarification for all things. The author argues that if the text itself claims to be a highly comprehensive guide, well, it has to be utilized as the primary, definitive guide in every aspect of legislation and practice.
Which leads us to a really crucial definition. Al-Shurafa emphasizes that the Quran is not merely a book of abstract sermons meant just for recitation. Instead, his methodology requires returning all our human disputes and variations in practice right back to this divine text, treating it as an active, living scale of justice.
Section 2. The danger of sanctifying human interpretation. The text gives a strong warning here against elevating human jurisprudence to the level of infallible divine law.
So the crucial point is this: without a clear Quranic origin or an explicit text, a ruling simply cannot be attributed to divine legislation. Al-Shurafa argues for a strict, unyielding boundary. Basically, Muslims must stop attributing practices to God if they lack a clear basis in the Quran.
To back this up, he points to Surah Al-Araf, verse 33, as his primary evidence. The verse argues that claiming divine authority, essentially putting words into the divine mouth without an explicit text to back it up, is not just a simple error, but a severe transgression.
Section 3. Zakat, a model for critical review. Let's move to and see how this builds from abstract theory into a highly practical case study mentioned in the text.
Historically, Zakat al-Fitr is known as a specific charitable tax. But the author asks a pretty direct question to consider here. Where exactly is the text that specifies this obligation? He's challenging the historical narrative, asking where we find the specific timing and the fixed amount of this tax in the original text.
According to the author's reading of Surah Al-Baqarah, verse 267, charitable spending is explicitly tied directly to the realization of profit, the exact moment you earn. His position is that there's no specific annual date mentioned. Instead, the door for giving is perpetually open at all times, essentially whenever a person receives financial provision.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how he breaks down the math. When calculating the required amount based strictly on the source text, the author derives a 20% proportion from Surah Al-Anfal, verse 41, which speaks of a fifth of gains. So he breaks earnings into a strict ratio. 1/5 or 20% dedicated to God through charity, and the remaining 80% retained by the earner.
To wrap up this Zakat example, Al-Shurafa points to Surah At-Talaq, verse 7. He argues that divine legislation is built entirely on mercy and capability, meaning spending is determined by your individual financial capacity. This ensures there is absolutely no hardship or injustice, rather than imposing rigid burdens.
Section 4. The sacred text and human understanding. Here, we introduce Bahjat al-Obaidi's analytical commentary on this whole framework.
Al-Obaidi views the Quran as the supreme cognitive standard used to resolve conflicting historical narratives. He sees this approach not just as a religious argument, but as a strict methodological vision. It's a way to actively filter out centuries of what he describes as a tangled, sectarian maze. He brilliantly separates this into two distinct categories. On one side, you have the absolute truth and infallibility of the divine text. On the other side, you have human nature and the relativity of our understanding. It's all about separating the perfect truth from our flawed, relative attempts to interpret it.
The implication here is profound. The commentator neutrally notes that classifying fiqh, or historical jurisprudence, as a mere human effort that can be right or wrong does not destroy Islamic heritage.
Rather, it simply puts human scholarship back in its proper, fallible place, preventing it from becoming an equal rival to divine revelation.
Section 5. A project to rebuild the Muslim mind. Let's explore the macro-level civilizational impact of returning strictly to the Quran, according to these sources.
Al-Obeidi outlines a really grand vision here. This structural reform isn't a regression to the past, it's an ambitious leap forward. Stripping away human additions aims to drastically reduce historical and sectarian conflict. It's meant to restore core Quranic values like justice, mercy, and freedom, and ultimately transform the religion into a forward-looking, civilizational moral project.
To bring this home, Al-Shurafa highlights the Prophet's complaint detailed in Surah Al-Furqan, verse 30. The author's interpretation emphasizes that abandonment doesn't just mean failing to recite the book. True abandonment means leaving its legislation behind and failing to use it as the ultimate scale in daily life.
Which leads us to a pretty provocative question based on everything we've covered today. Does abandoning the text truly mean abandoning its legislation? I want to thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Independently ponder the true meaning of applying this text and how it might shift our understanding of history and law. Keep exploring, and I'll see you next time.
مؤسسة رسالة السلام العالمية، رسالة إنسانية لعالم أكثر سلاماً.